Hi, good morning. It's Dr. Michael McNeil here. But now today I wanted to speak about, I think, a topic which is probably, how can I say, it's probably caused me more, burnt more hours thinking about this probably than lots of other issues. I think maybe in times past I thought it was a relatively simple issue and accepted quite simple answers about the problem. And then as time's gone on, especially when I was doing my, I think when I first was doing my masters, I started to think about this in a bit more detail when I encountered the work of Cornelius van Til. And then when I was doing my doctorate, there was times where this really, this particular issue really causes a lot of thought. Because I think it's the subject of free will, and do humans have free will? I think it has enormous philosophical implications, and also it's such an issue that's dealt with in so many places within the Hebrew and Christian scriptures. It's a subject which, the thing about scripture is that scripture's narrative, and there's different genres of narrative, but it's narrative. It's not like systematic theology. So which is basically like in philosophy, you would just say, like a philosophical system. Systematic theology is exactly the same thing. The division between philosophy and theology is it's only there for purposes of convenience, for teaching and for talking about it. But really, they're dealing with the same subject matter. They might be looking at it, coming at it from different realms and different perspectives, but really you're dealing with many of the same questions. And with free will, it's a subject that's got enormous philosophical significance, and it's been something that's been considered in great depth, particularly in say with Aristotle. And the Greeks had a view of this. This is one of the reasons why what happened during the sort of like the Reformation time was so significant, because their change in philosophical perspective had enormous implications particularly for the progress of science. And so I'll just dive in here. So it's a subject which, if you consider, it has enormous ethical implications. And just consider this. So it's like if you consider, say that one of the predominant views, sort of like in the rationalism of Greece, because they were basically rationalists. They were using deductive logic, even though Aristotle's thought was much more empirical. His metaphysics was still very, his view of the world was still very, very deterministic. He said, well, so if you think there's certain rules that are present in nature, by nature consider the whole of the visible cosmos, the whole of your experience, the whole of the phenomenal world. It's not just to do with sort of, when people say nature, it's not just to do with sort of like the green grass and the blue sky and all that's part of nature, but it's all the different processes of nature. The view very much was there's certain principles or laws, and those laws are logical laws, and they're very, very deterministic, and if you based on, in a sense, syllogistic and deterministic logic. And it's like they really had this sort of like this view that in the sense that there was no free will. So you are just a product, and the universe is just a product of certain laws, and in the sense they were teleological, so things just work their way out. And so so immediately you see that if that is the case, if there is just a strong determinism in nature, then that has enormous enormous ethical implications. So in more modern times, you might say this is the sort of view which, say, behaviourist psychology this is the foundation of behaviourist psychology, and you then consider, well, what are the implications for human society and for political structure, because this really has enormous significance. And if you've ever encountered the work of Professor B.F. Skinner, who's very, very famous, he wrote a novel in 1958 called Walden 2, and it was like a utopian scientific novel. It's almost like a mirror image of Huxley's Brave New World, except he was saying, and the Brave New World is actually really great. So, scientific planning of society could deliver us from all the ills that affected the world. So, and this is strong and very strong in our culture today. The idea that human behaviour is governed by particular scientific laws, and that you can model and change and manipulate people's behaviour for the overall benefit of society. That is the scientific background that springs out of this view, which is a philosophical view regarding your free will. So this is not some sort of like little issue that's out on the side of philosophy, and that people have spilled much ink regarding this subject. This is one of my things I'm trying to get over to people. When if you're listening to me, I'm saying that you can't segment off your ethics from your theory of knowledge and then your theory of the wider universe. They're intimately connected together. So as I've sort of like already hinted at, there's enormous amount talked about in theology regarding the topic of free will, and in philosophical theology, obviously, there's an enormous significance connected with this debate, and it's an intense debate, and it's still very much a live debate. There's still much discussion talking about this because of its interaction on a theological level with. And when you're talking about metaphysics, I'm not necessarily talking about people having a particular religious point of view. It's not necessarily talking about that, but it has enormous significance regarding the topic of what does the presence of evil in the world have? What sort of theological significance has that for sort of say belief in God? And so that's something I sort of I'll get to today. So I think. I'll probably end up chopping this one up again, because I'm pretty sure this will burn up some minutes, and sometimes it's nice to have those smaller chunks that you can come back to sort of like during different bits of the day. So I always listen to when I'm washing up after lunch or something. I'll be listening to something for that short section, and then I'll have to go back to my work. So I understand, but then there's other times where I want to really be able to listen to the whole thing. I'm still finding my pattern. I'm still needing to get equipment so I can do these videos better, and then maybe in the future I'll redo the same topics, because I'll watch myself and I realise my faults with my speaking and my mannerisms and going around in circles and stuff. So I will improve. But what I want to do is I want to sell philosophy. I want to say it's important to think about the whys of your existence rather than just ending up just being put on the conveyor belt of life. So let's just think, go back to where I was starting. So philosophical determinism, the idea that there's scientific laws regarding behaviour. Why if you believe that, say, scientific behaviour is scientifically, that there's certain hard scientific laws of behaviour, Some people sort of like might crudely put it like this, that we're nothing but advanced white rats, and therefore you can study. I think it was actually around about 1914 where I think the first explicit psychological treatise on behaviourism was presented, and I think W. Quine mentions it as a formative part of his something that really inspired him in his younger days, but the person who wrote it didn't have very much success in it. I think it was something like it took about maybe 10-15 years later for the movement really to get going, and so it's very much sort of like the idea that yes, you can study human beings as if you were studying anything else, and you could predict what their behaviour is. So the implications of that particular view are that say if your behaviour is conditioned by your environment and the different variables that are in your environment, then do you have any culpability, say, for the violence which is that you commit, or if you're stealing or robbing, the implications of this environment, that your behaviour is completely predictable because of the environment, then the fault doesn't lie with you and your personal responsibility for your actions, but it's actually to do with the external environment and the things that are happening in your environs and where you live, and whether you're living in a city area which is historically poor. There's lots of drugs there, there's lots of violence there, there's lots of prostitution there, there's corrupt police there, there's corrupt councillors there, so this whole environment, and therefore the fact that you end up like you are, that's not your fault. And this, in a sense, is at the back of what Professor Skinner was talking about, and why he was saying we needed this new scientific utopia. We needed to plan using scientific behaviourist presumptions for a better society. Now, that's very much, I'm very much skimming over that, but that view, that was exactly his view in brief, and if you read his, he went, I think it was in the mid sort of like 70s where he first published, and then I think it was reissued a bit later, and there's now a whole foundation that I think the BF, there's a website for BF Skinner, you can go on and look, and they very much tried to rehabilitate him and make him liberal friendly. I'm not being rude when I say liberal, I'm just saying it, the harshness and the real Brave New World feel of his work that you would when you read it, and what he was presenting, this sort of like this vision that he was presenting, it's very, very much softened it up now, and it's trying to sort of to say, well, yes, let's look at crime and punishment, we say, or instead of because some of his insights, he has some quite very, very interesting insights as to how say when you're in education, when you're in the classroom, instead of having sanctions such to maintain discipline or something, you're doing things in a particular different way. You're managing the environment, and behavioural science and is now very much recognised as important science, and if you as we've just lived through say the COVID era, you saw enormous, in many ways the world was divided up into little petri dishes with behavioural scientists doing their experiments on populations to see how they could get populations to behave, and how were groups of people going to behave, and were people going to comply. It wasn't anything really to do with COVID and a response to a new variant of the flu. There was something much bigger going on with what, if you like, the globalists who, in a sense, the Skinner sort of like idea and transhumanists that come in, and who picked up on his ideas in many ways. They've developed his ideas, and they're technologically focused and they're technocrats. But the foundation of this is very much sort of like Skinner's philosophy. And he had a very revolutionary view of, say, what do we consider important in issues of, say, political philosophy, where we think freedom, individuality, even just thinking of those two, those things are very, very important to us, and say freedom of speech. And he actually said that things like freedom, individuality, and the whole list of things that you read and you think, yeah, they're really important for a free society, and democracy. People, in the sense that the people who the key. And I've got a particular view of democracy, because in many ways what's been going on in the US is that democracy has been redefined from a traditional ancient definition of democracy, where the governed get their authority and legitimacy to govern from the consent of the governed. So it's like a government of the people. Democracy has been redefined in the left in US politics anyway at the moment. It's been redefined as the institutions of democracy and the preservation of the current status quo of the institutions of democracy. And that's happening in Europe too. We're seeing that's like a cultural move in the West. And so anybody that's in opposition to that new status quo, that new definition of democracy, is classified as an enemy of democracy, and therefore they're a threat to democracy, and therefore they go after. And the idea of, say, freedom of speech and individual liberty and all those things, Skinner said those are like legacies. They're legacies of a Christian past, and they're obstacles to progress. And he said if we want a harmonious and a planned and an equal where people are, and there's equity within society, we need to do proper scientific planning. And so you can see that's that sort of view, which is based on sort of like the idea that human beings are advanced white rats. It has enormous political significance, ethical significance of how you treat other peoples and how you relate to other people in society and what your role in society is. And so it's not just like a little adjunct issue. This is like a really, 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 it's one of those philosophical issues that when you see the way society is, and the way you see the direction people are trying to push society into, you understand what's the philosophy that's at the back of it. So that, in a sense, is it's been like an issue. Yes, it's been live since ancient Greece. The ancient Greeks were very deterministic in their thoughts, and that's why, in a sense, that even though Aristotle was considered much more empirical than Plato, he never really moved beyond Then they were still very much operating within those constraints. So perhaps what I want to move on to next is, because that's enough in a sense to for you. Well, I think that's enough of a meal to think, wow, that's just even within the quote, scare quotes, secular realm. You can see how important this sort of like idea and the implications of this idea is of philosophical determinism. Now, there is enormous significance. I want to talk a bit about sort of like the theology of this.